Hey, what's cracking lagging everyone? So this is a discussion I've wanted to get into on my channel since I set it up really. Others have talked about this of course, but hey, this is my channel and I haven't talked about it yet, so thanks to the recent updates in games like Doom and even indie titles like Morphite, I feel like it's finally time to break this discussion out, as well as having some footage of games as ammunition as to why I feel this way. Ever since the Wii and DS, Nintendo have pushed hard and introduced many gamers to the fun and benefits of motion and touch controls, as well as two-screen gaming and a wealth of other things, as we know from the beginning. The Wiimote controls, when done right, for me, made some of those genres that were in some ways for me starting to get a little tired. It made them more fun and engaging, whilst adding unique gameplay ideas that you hadn't really experienced before. The DS was the same, and like many things in this industry, I don't think we should ever underestimate the impact the Nintendo DS had, not just on the gaming handheld space, but also on the mobile phone space, because I would happily sit here and discuss how it was the DS that made touchscreens on phones popular, and we all know how that has ended. But sorry, I'm jumping off topic here a little, but I said it before and I'll say it again. As utterly sublime and awesome that Metroid Prime 3 is, I feel that if the GameCube-like controls had remained from Prime 1 and Prime 2, Prime 3 might have felt a little tired around the edges, but thankfully the legends that are Retro Studios incorporated into Metro Prime 3 those awesome Wiimote pointer controls that in my opinion weren't bettered on the Wii since. Even Capcom added pointer controls into the likes of Resident Evil 4 on the Wii, and many swore by that version as the best because of those motion controls. After completing Prime 3, I remember sitting and thinking, man, I'm not sure I'll be able to go back to dual analog sticks for first-person games again. That's the crumb honest truth. As played out, unfortunately, the rest of the industry didn't see it like this, and analog sticks are still the go-to controls on consoles. Saying that, Sony of course tried to follow suit, but after disasters like Leia and its forced access controls, which arguably killed the once awesomeness that was Factor 5, as well as other inclusions of the access control in the likes of Heavenly Sword, which once again didn't quite work out due to its implementation. It wasn't until after the Wii that Nintendo tried again in terms of gyro controls. Roll forward to the Wii U and 3DS, and Nintendo didn't give up their quest to push different forms of controls onto gamers. Looking for ways for new controls and gameplay to emerge from new hardware approaches. Ignoring the other features of the Wii U gamepad and the 3DS for the discussion, one thing the Wii U gamepad did have was a built-in accelerometer and gyroscope. So I guess you could actually call that two things. The 3DS also had built-in motion and gyro sensors. What this began to offer us was another form of subtle movement, something that the N64's analog stick first started to push, but as time went on, those subtle analog stick controls over generations and generations started to become abandoned, I feel. The gyro controls offered a level of precision and finesse that I feel we had began to forget whilst using two analog sticks. These gyro controls was the best type of finesse and precision that mouse and keyboard offered us, but even with analog stick controls were yet to offer that fine precision I felt. Games like The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time 3D began to introduce the use of gyro controls for going into first-person mode and shooting with your slingshot or bow and arrows. This subtle movement started to feel fantastic and made aiming with your weapons just that much more easier or intuitive. Nintendo Land, with its assortment of mini-games, began to use gyro and motion controls for finer movements in some of its games, which once again felt great, as well as a wealth of other games. But it wasn't until this game where I feel for many people that at least in this style of game, dual analog sticks as a sole control method had been replaced, and this game is Splatoon. I believe that if you ask most seasoned Splatoon players, very few of them play using only dual analog sticks. This is because the finer movements of the gyro controls in the gamepad on the Wii U still were perfect for the fast-paced action of Splatoon, allowing players to focus as precisely as they needed to on players or the environment. This game, I feel, was a turning point for many gamers when it came to motion and gyro controls in their controllers. The Wii U also used gyro controls in other games like Yoshi's Woolly World, where you could tilt to aim your eggs, something I'd done throughout my whole playthrough. Wind Waker went ahead and perfected the gyro controls of Ocarina of Time 3DS. And then you had Star Fox Zero, which unfortunately stumbled with its execution of all these control schemes. But man, when it worked, the ability to control your craft and shoot in any direction, for me, once again, had me thinking that I'm not sure I can go back to the regular old Star Fox where you'd only shot in the direction your ship went. Come to today, and we have the Nintendo Switch, a console which has taken the strongest elements of Nintendo's motion control past and implemented them in such a way that it borderlines on near perfection. At the moment for where we are. I'm not sure about anyone else, but using motion controls to aim with Link's weapons, items, or tackling puzzles in Breath of the Wild, are utterly sublime, and I found myself pushing the analog stick in the general direction that I wanted, then fine-tuning my aim with the motion controls, and honestly, I find this control method just so much more natural and intuitive that for me it felt like there's just no going back, and that was evident when I started playing Rise of the Tomb Raider on the PlayStation 4 recently. To control Lara and to use her bow to try and aim at fast moving objects or anything like that with dual analog sticks. I know it sounds stupid because we've used these controls for years, but after coming off something like Wind Waker to then go into something like Tomb Raider and losing those gyro controls, for me it was night and day. It's Breath of the Wild's gyro controls all the way. Some can argue that motion controls of ARMS match, or even for some people surpass, using what we perceive as standard controls when playing this game. And I guess you need look no further than Kozuki Yabuki, who kicked challengers' asses using only motion controls. Now, players' skill level will always be a decided factor when it comes to games, of course, but as Mr. Yabuki is showing, he's using very little effort to control his characters using the split Joy-Cons and motion controls, and seems to be in full control of his character, showing incredible skill and winning the matches he was having. Then of course we have Splatoon 2, which once again allows the player to use motion controls, refining even further on what the first game achieved. And with the Switch's Pro Controller also supporting gyro controls, many people are simply not looking back to just dual analog sticks. Even games like Mario Kart 8 and Mario Odyssey all use motion and gyro controls to enhance their experience. And I personally played the entirety of Mario Odyssey using split Joy-Cons and the motion controls involved. You can argue that Nintendo set this game up this way, but then I can argue that they just simply worked better than having to rotate analog sticks or hold multiple buttons in order to pull off certain moves. There are many things in gaming people are quick to brush off. Motion controls being one of them, as we know. But like with all games, as controls evolve and become more refined, you begin to wonder how you only ever played using just a single joystick, going back to the Atari and Commodore days, or a single D-pad, going back to the NES and the Master System, a single analog stick, going back to the N64, and now for me, I'm wondering how I only ever played with just two analog sticks after experiencing a large number of games that have incorporated gyro and motion controls to sometimes assist dual analog sticks, or at times to even surpass them in my opinion. I also wonder how many new Switch owners who perhaps never owned a previous Nintendo console or have not previously played a game that uses such motion controls or gyro controls. Now I wonder how they feel now that they own a Switch, or perhaps have played Zelda or Splatoon as examples, or perhaps have downloaded the patch for Doom, the latest patch for Doom, which adds gyro controls. I wonder if they are now using a combination of gyro controls and analog sticks as their standard control setup, and now either see something like Doom as the definitive version, or perhaps just can't even go back to just normal analog sticks. Of course, there will be those who are not bothered or still prefer dual analog sticks for themselves, which is absolutely fine. Of course, this is the beauty of the Switch as we know it, and gaming today. There are essentially control setups for all preferences. But for me, I need these types of controls to become more standard in many games. And luckily, as a Nintendo player, they seem to have become standard on Nintendo platforms, which is fantastic. I guess this then asks the question about the future. What will eventually replace analog sticks and gyro controls completely? Food for thought, I guess. Anyway, I think I'm done here. What are your thoughts, people? Are you a fan of gyro controls like me, or do you still prefer dual analog sticks by themselves, or do you prefer a combination of both like me? As always, thanks for listening, and I very much look forward to your comments below. Peace.